Committee will come to order. For the first time in nearly a decade, the House Armed Services Committee meets today to hear testimony on threats facing our country from around the world. And I have certainly been struck by the consensus of opinion from our most respected and practiced statesmen that our country faces a strategic environment today more complex, more diverse, and in many ways more dangerous than we've ever faced before. I noticed just last week Dr. Henry Kissinger testified before the Senate that we have not faced a more diverse and complex array of crises since the end of the Second World War. And former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright said, "We're living through a time of monumental change across the world." Several observers have said if it was any one or two of these challenges, we could probably deal with them. But it's the combination of things all happening at the same time that presents unprecedented national security challenges. From the continued modernization of nuclear programs to conventional and unconventional aggressiveness by rival competitors, to global spread of a terrorist ideology and dealing with new domains of warfare, a clear-eyed look around the world is sobering. And as members of the National Defense Panel testified before us just about 2 months ago, they expect the situation to deteriorate further. I think it's essential that we better understand this threat as we approach the annual National Defense Authorization Act and as we discuss with our colleagues the appropriate amount of money that needs to be spent to defend the country. Today, we're pleased to welcome the new Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General Vincent Stewart, as well as Acting Director for Intelligence for the Joint Staff, Mr. Mark Chandler, and the Director for Operations for the Joint Staff, Lieutenant General William Mayville, to give us a consumer perspective on intelligence. I'd ask unanimous consent that my complete opening statement be made part of the record, and I would yield to the distinguished Acting Ranking Member, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly want to welcome our witnesses here today, and thank you very much for joining us. I want to make just a few comments that Ranking Member Adam Smith had prepared in response to this hearing today on the worldwide threats. As you acknowledge, Mr. Chairman, and others, the world is a dangerous and complicated place, and it seems to be getting more complicated. It is easy to recite a list of challenges. We see Russia seizing the territory of Ukraine and supplying men, weapons, and assistance to the rebels there. In recent months, North Korea conducted a cyber attack against a major movie studio, bringing home to many Americans not just the challenge posed by the regime, but the very real ways in which cyber operations can impact all of our lives. While we are engaged in very difficult negotiations with the Iranian regime, they continue to pose challenges in a number of places, such as backing the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Assad regime in Syria. And at the same time, both they and we are assisting the Iraqi government in its struggles with the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, known as ISIL. ISIL and the Syrian conflict at large provide a seemingly endless list of potential challenges and threats, from waves of refugees destabilizing neighborhood regimes to the spread of terrorism, to broader Sunni-Shia fighting, to foreign fighters returning home. And the list goes on. Even as all of this continues, al-Qaeda core has not entirely been eliminated, and some al-Qaeda offshoots continue to plot attacks against us and cause further regional problems. We cannot take our eye off that ball, just as we need to be very cognizant that we still maintain troops in Afghanistan, and that country, while vastly better off than before, is still very fragile. And similarly, Pakistan, a nuclear-armed state, is currently conducting major and effective operations against some internal extremist threats, but hardly all of them, and the future stability of Pakistan is not a settled matter. As we look long-term, Russia's role in Europe and Asia is not clear, but the recent actions and their renewed and ongoing military buildup are not encouraging signs. Although we should not assume an adversarial relationship with China, their actions in the South China Sea and their military developments bear watching. In summary, the world has hardly become less complex since the fall of the Iron Curtain. While we may not face the same existential threat posed by the Soviet Union, the threats we face today are still very real and, again, very complex. An increased and deep understanding of these threats and the trends and developments that drive them is key for this committee as we work to shape the defense budget and help the Department of Defense and the rest of the national security establishment in their ongoing actions in our defense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We look forward to the presentations today.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. For the members' information, our plan is to have a closed classified session as time and interest permits after the open session. So I would just remind everybody we are in open session here, and to keep that in mind with the questions, and obviously our witnesses will remember that too. That closed session will take place in 2212. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. Without objection, your complete written statements will be made part of the record. And right now, we would certainly turn it over to you for any oral statements you'd like to make. General Stewart, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman Thornberry, Congressman Davis, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify and for your continued support to the dedicated intelligence professionals of the Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm honored to serve as their director and to represent them at this hearing. I'm also pleased to be joined today by Lieutenant General William Mayville, Director of Operations of the Joint Staff, and Mr. Mark Chandler, Acting Director of Intelligence for the Joint Staff. Mr. Chairman, the global security environment is the most challenging of our lifetime, a confluence of political, military, social, and technological developments which, taken in aggregate, have created security challenges more diverse and complex than any we have ever experienced. Our challenges range from highly capable near-peer competitors to empowered individuals with nefarious intentions. Increasing demands coupled with today's challenging fiscal environment have stressed our defense and intelligence establishments and forced us to accept greater risk. This strategic environment will be with us for some time, and the threats, increasing scope, volatility, and complexity have become the new normal. Your DIA focuses on a myriad of threats, actors, and challenges as noted in our written statement to the committee. I will highlight 3 of our priorities in my oral remarks. 1, Capable military competitors. Russian military activity, for example, is at historically high levels. Moscow is pursuing aggressive foreign and defense policies, including conducting destabilizing operations in the Ukraine, conducting a record number of out-of-area naval operations, and increasing its long-range aviation patrols. In addition, Beijing is focused on building a modern military capable of achieving success on the 21st century battlefield and advancing its core interests, which include maintaining its sovereignty, protecting its territorial integrity, and projecting its regional influence. 2, an increase in vulnerable and ungoverned territory due to the erosion of moderate and secular Islamic states. While coalition strikes have degraded ISIL's ability to operate openly in Iraq and Syria, the group retains the ability to conduct limited offensive operations and is seeking to expand its presence and influence beyond these two countries. Governments in countries such as Egypt, Algeria, Jordan, and Lebanon are under stress from a variety of sources, thereby reducing their capability as a region to confront the threat posed by violent extremists. The breakdown of order of Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and northern Nigeria are fertile spawning grounds for the growth of terrorist organizations that can pose a significant threat to the U.S. homeland and our allies. Moreover, al-Qaeda core leaders and followers retain transnational attack capability and will seek to use its remaining personnel to target Western interests in South Asia and worldwide. 3, malign actors seeking to challenge the U.S. and our allies in space and cyber domains. China and Russia increasingly recognize the strategic value of space and are focusing on diminishing our advantage. Both countries are conducting anti-satellite research and developing anti-satellite weapons with the intent of denying the U.S. the use of space in the event of conflict. For the Department of Defense, the cyber threat is particularly alarming because of the interconnected nature of our military weapons, communications, and networks. At low cost, with limited technical expertise, our adversaries have the potential to cause severe damage and disruption to U.S. systems, leaving little or no footprint behind. Finally, the exponential growth of communications, both mobile and social media, have the potential to magnify international crises and shorten our already compressed decision-making cycle. In closing, I'd be remiss if I did not note my concern about the impacts of sequestration on DIA and other members of the military intelligence community. The demand signal for more intelligence from our consumers, including the Congress, has never been greater. Sequestration and the support to crisis operations around the globe has forced us to accept risk in important areas that will have a direct and lasting impact on our ability to provide high-quality, nuanced intelligence required by policymakers and warfighters. I fear that the true cost of these difficult choices today may be paid on the battlefield of the future. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for this opportunity. We look forward to answering the questions of the committee.
Thank you. Who's next?
Please give me any statement.
Okay. Y'all do not have oral statements that you're going to make?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you. General, let me just ask one preliminary question, then I want to get to my colleagues who obviously have a lot of things on their minds. For some time, I have cited this book, America's First Battles, where the editors write that the record of Americans' ability to predict the nature of the next war, not to mention its causes, location, time, adversaries, and allies, has been uniformly dismal. I think General Dempsey has said we get it, we have a 100% record of getting it right 0% of the time, who we're going to fight in our next war. So do you agree that that's kind of the history of things? We're not very good at predicting. And secondly, would you amplify a little bit about how resources affect DIA's ability to gather intelligence and help us be prepared for whatever threat may be coming next?
Congressman, I think historically, the community has done a fairly decent job of predicting in the past crisis. I think that's getting more complex. I think the ability to cover the globe with the intelligence capability of either the department or our partners is making it very difficult to see the world, see it in a timely manner, and deliver convincingly the argument that says there's a crisis looming. I think it's also complicated by social media and the current use of media around the globe. Many times, what we can, in fact, detect doesn't give sufficient warning across the globe. So our ability to warn is being reduced. Our ability to influence the action compellingly is being reduced. And I don't see it getting any easier, quite frankly.
Okay. General Mayville, let me ask you briefly, from a consumer of intelligence perspective, just give us, if you will, an overview of the challenges you face in your job as the J3 in the sort of security environment we're in now.
Thank you, sir. First off, it's important to remember that every one of our adversaries studies us. So as we evolve and prepare, they take close lessons on our last fight, and they look for indications of how we'll fight tomorrow. This is dynamic. So one of the challenges is we always come up against adversaries that are well prepared against us. Intelligence typically falls down, at least initially, in the last 300 meters of the fight, the tactical fight. I think we're very good at broad strategic directions. We get a sense of operationally what is in the art of the possible, and indications and warnings vary, but by and large, I think we have a general sense of the trajectory of how things are going. Where we typically suffer is understanding the last 300 meters, and that requires that we have an adaptive force, a force that's well-versed in a wide range of capabilities, but we have leaders that have been developed so that we can shift and adapt to the environment that we have. I saw that in the initial steps of the OIF when we came in focused against Republican Guard divisions, very much trained for that type of fight, and literally overnight the nature of the fight changed on us, and we had a different fight on our hands. And what you saw over the last decade or so was an adaptive force that figured it out. I would say that one of the challenges we have, particularly with non-state actors, is the demand for intelligence is insatiable. It is in some ways more complex to try to figure out what's going on. So many other factors impact what your adversary is doing outside just the military, traditional military lines of operation. What's going on inside the communities? What's going on inside the tribal constructs? Where is their sources of power? How are they getting that together? And the intelligence to pull all that together, one, it puts great demands on our intelligence agencies, and two, it's an insatiable demand that's out there, and it's very, very difficult for tactical commanders on the ground to have the kind of understanding that they want, and they'll always put a demand on whatever intelligence is available to them.
Okay. Well, I suspect other members will want to explore further how well we've done at predicting state actors like Russia and Ukraine, and how well we did in predicting ISIS and a variety of other challenges. But I'll yield to Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And perhaps this is just following up somewhat. I think in even a whole of government approach, because one of the things that we know is that we don't always understand what's going on the ground, of course. And I'm wondering if you could speak to some of I guess, where in fact we approach things in a way that we least understand. And as an example, the Shia-Sunni divide. And do we expect that a Shia government can be inclusive when it comes to the region and the Sunnis there as well? And there are other examples like that. Are those some of the ways in which we really have great difficulty trying to understand the dynamics in the region?
I think part of the challenge, our military intelligence was designed for a different type of adversary. large formations, constructs that could be easily seen and defined. The conflict we face now is much more diffused. Understanding cultures and understanding tribal interactions and understanding really the deep intent behind some of these extremist ideology is hard to define with the existing system. You need probably a much more robust human intelligence capability to get after some of the intentions and the culture and the ideology differences in order to be really effective. We're really good at finding large formations, targeting large formations, and watching those movements. But some of the nuances that come with individuals and leadership intentions become really, really difficult.
Mr. Chandler, did you want to?
Ma'am, I'll echo General Stewart's comments. And you look at the cultural intelligence aspects of this and understanding the societies and the interaction between the societies. And another aspect to go into is the historical nature of some of these conflicts and the tribal alliances that you start to look at, not just in the Sunni Shia, but as that spreads out around the globe. The societies that we're looking at, and as General Mayville alluded to, looking deeper into some of the threats and some of the challenges we face, go much beyond state actors, go much beyond what we see in a Western society. And that's where we have to take our intelligence capabilities and look on a different level and in a different contextual framework.
Are we positioned to do that?
Ma'am, I think we are. I think it's a process that we go through. As General Stewart said, we're great at finding big formations, targeting them, and then turning that over to our operational elements. However, we have a good core of young intelligence professionals, and we have to nuance this. We have to work our way through an understanding of how we take the large formations, understanding tribal societies and elements and the changes, and look at history. We cannot ignore history and bring that core of intelligence professionals up. It's not at all a technological advantage that we can utilize here. It's an understanding, and I think we have a good core of professionals that are starting to work their way through that. So we have the core capability. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm going to yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Forbes.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to thank you for having this hearing. It's so important that we discuss these threats and bring them to the country's attention. And to each of you gentlemen, thank you for the service that you render to our country, and thank you for being here today. And one of the things that we benefit so much from you being here for is that you're able to give us not just the department's view, but you're able to give us your best professional military judgment, and that's what I'm asking for now. And General, for you, here's the dilemma that I have is, as I listen to you, it obviously concerns me and scares me as we see all of these enormous threats that are around the world. And yet I look at what we've been doing as a nation for the last 6 years. We cut $780 billion out of national defense before sequestration even got there. And then we got another $500 billion of sequestration. And it looks like those curve lines for our national defense are going down, and these threats are just proliferating around the globe. And so the question I would ask of you today on your best professional military judgment is, did the Pentagon just miss all of this that was happening, or did we just ignore it?
Congressman, I think most of the service chiefs have been on the record as saying that the requirements continue to go up while resources continue to go down.
But General, let me just, if I can, because I respect you so much, they did not. On that $787 billion, I pleaded with them, tell us what we need, and they continued to come up, now not sequestration, but up until sequestration, they kept saying we're good to go with this. And what we just need to learn maybe from our mistake, and this is our opportunity to do it. Looking back in hindsight, not putting fingers on anybody, did we make a mistake by making all those drastic cuts when we now see all of these huge threats around the world?
I will offer only this, Congressman. The threat, the requirements for the intelligence community is growing. The resources are going down. The risk is getting greater. At some point, there are things that we will have to say we cannot do. That's where we are today. At some point, I'll have to come back and identify the things, one through X that we can do, and everything else will have to be risk. And I'm not comfortable at all with that posture.
General Mayfield, in your estimation, your best professional military judgment, looking at it now with hindsight, did we make mistakes by making that many cuts that we did when we look at these threats that are out there? And did we miss these things, or did we just ignore them?
I won't look back, Congressman, but I will look forward. I think that what I saw in testimony from the service chiefs was a broad agreement that we have the military we need to meet today's requirements, that we are minimally acceptable levels for what is required today. If you're asking me what are the trend lines for the future, my concern is that we continue to see new threats, threats that have studied us, both state and non-state actors. And I am concerned about our ability to posture ourselves to meet tomorrow's threats. I think we have the best military. I know we have the best military in the world, and I am confident that we can meet all of the requirements our nation gives us today. I am, however, concerned about the future.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just go on record as saying, because I know you've been preaching this same sermon, but for the last several years, I've just seen cut after cut after cut to national defense. And now we come in today and we see these enormous risks around the globe. And I think at some point in time, we need to say enough is enough and begin getting those curve lines turned back in the right direction. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Takai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chandler, you made the statement, we cannot not ignore history, and I just hope that we can learn from it.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Mr. Scott, it's this Texas accent that people are having trouble with. I want to stay on this side of the aisle, and then I'll come back.
I understand.
Yeah, no, I said Mr. Takai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Stewart, with all the focus on the Middle East, can we shift gears and tell me what currently is the biggest threat to stability in the Asia-Pacific area?
There are a number of things in the Asia-Pacific area that causes me concern. North Korea's destabilizing action is cause for concern. They continue to modernize their military. They continue to seek nuclear capability. That is very destabilizing on the peninsula. We also see extended operations by Chinese as they modernize their military forces and extend their reach into areas such as the South China Sea. Those are destabilizing factors. Those are probably the two biggest ones in the region.
Okay, thank you. General Mayville, how does our current force posture in the Pacific align with these responding threats in the Pacific?
In the Pacific, we want to make sure that we have, and we do have, the requisite forces to deter a DPRK aggression. We want to make sure that we can dissuade them of the use of nuclear capabilities. We want to be present in meaningful numbers to assure our allies of our U.S. commitment and our reliability. We want to have a presence in the region, and we do have a presence in the region sufficient to preserve the freedom of navigation through international laws and norms. And we want to have the ability to sustain our presence and be ready not just for what is required today, but to be postured to respond to a contingency tomorrow.
Thank you. So would reductions in the U.S. force posture in Asia Pacific exacerbate the current security challenges that we have?
I am not aware of any reductions, planned reductions within the department for our forces in the Asia Pacific. But I think that if what you're referring to is how might the lack of resources impact our current capabilities and presence, it would be significant.
Thank you. Maybe more specifically, there is some discussions regarding possible force reductions on the Army side in Hawaii specifically. Can you talk about those reductions affecting the security challenges in the Asia-Pacific area?
I apologize, I can't speak to an Army specific decision. As again, I'm unaware, but I'll take that back and ensure we get you a response from the Army on that.
Okay, thank you. And are any countries in a position to prevent the United States from effectively operating in the Western Pacific? Either of you can answer that.
I think both China has done extensive training to counter U.S. forces in the region. They've sophisticated air and missile and space defense capabilities. I think that they're designing their forces to challenge military presence of the United States in the region. They have fairly sophisticated missile systems that can counter a number of our platforms, and we'd certainly welcome an opportunity to talk a little bit more about this in closed session, but I think both China training and some of their weapons capabilities a significant threat to our forces.
Thank you. One last question. Do you think we're losing, I mean, you're speaking about China, what about technology? Do you think we're losing our technological edge to China?
I do not believe we're losing our technological edge to China, but I do believe China has a concerted effort to, as much as possible, gather intellectual property to close the gap between our technological edge and their capability. I do not believe at this point that we are losing our technological edge, but it is at risk based on some of their cyber activities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. General Stewart, if you don't mind, if you would pull your microphone close to your mouth, especially when you turn your head, it gets a little hard to hear up here in the stratosphere. I'd appreciate it. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here today. And as we are talking about threats to the American people and security around the world, I want to join with Congressman Forbes. I believe that we're at the most dangerous period since 1939. And the instability around the world, the threats to the American people, and he's already brought up, Congressman Forbes, that there's been projected $1 trillion in reductions in our defense capability. The result of that is that we will have the smallest army, and the American people need to know this, the smallest army since 1939, the smallest Navy since 1916, the smallest Air Force since it was created in 1947. This is in contravention to something that we learned during the Cold War, peace through strength. By having a strong military, the American military produced a situation with the broadest spread of democracy in the history of the world. Dozens of countries became free because we had a strong national defense. But the consequence of what I see going on today under this administration is putting the American people at risk. An additional risk is cyber warfare. And for each of you, how would you characterize the disruptive and destructive cyber threats to the Department of Defense network from state actors and from terrorist organizations such as ISIL and Al-Qaeda? And General Mayville?
Thank you, Congressman. To your point, I think a smaller force puts a greater demand on the force you have. I think it also puts a demand on their families. It will force us to have a greater reliance on our allies and partners, and it will cause us to make tough decisions in terms of operational priorities. On cyber and the ability of the Department of Defense to defend its networks, I'm very, very confident in our abilities to defend our network. It's an area that we look at every day. I'm well aware of the intrusions or attempts at intrusions, and have a confidence in our systems and in our training, as well as in Cyber Command, to address the current threats. Our
Our ability to defend the networks is pretty strong, but the threat is growing. from a number of nation states, Russia, China, Iran. The cost of entry in cyberspace operations is pretty low. It doesn't take a really high-tech capability to do damage to our networks, and you only have to get it right once. So the threat is real from a wide range of actors, nation states and non-nation states. So the challenge, I think, going forward for us is how do you see the threat environment more discreetly, because this is really a tough space. We built tremendous capabilities to defend our network and to maybe even conduct offensive operations. What we've not done, I believe, is built the intelligence capability to see the threat early enough, warn early enough, rather than reacting to an attack on our network. Also, the intelligence required to do anything offensively is pretty exquisite. And so I don't know that we've invested sufficiently in that capability to do cyberspace operation in its full extent.
I would just echo the General's comments on being able to identify the threat early enough based on the complexities of the cyber environment. That is what we have to look at into the future and be able to identify that. We have great cyber capability within the Department of Defense, but it's identifying those threats to the networks early enough.
And I have a real concern, too, of adversaries coming into our systems and determining the technology we have and replicating it to match whatever defensive capabilities we have. And General Mayville, I appreciate your comments relative to working with our allies, but due to economic stagnation that's existent in many countries around the world, particularly allies to the United States and Europe, there is a shift where the military budgets are extraordinarily reduced to virtually non-existence. And so I'm very concerned at the thought that we might be counting on countries that are actually, their view is, if not America, who? And so it's not them. And so I look forward to working with you to try to help work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Ashford. Pass. Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony here this morning and your service to the country. Having spent some time in the Department of Defense myself, I understand that the strength of our nation's military is about our capabilities. And there's not always a strict correlation between the strength of a military and the size of the budget or the number of personnel. As a platoon commander in Iraq, there are times when I would have gladly traded another 40-man platoon for one ISR feed. And so the point is, we really have to understand as best we can what the threats are going forward. And I'm relatively new to this committee, but it strikes me that much of the testimony we've heard just over the past few weeks has been focused on Russia and China. Now, hearing you describe your own capabilities at the DIA, you note that you're very good, really good, at finding large formations and big adversaries, but also that many of today's threats are more diverse, dispersed, and difficult to understand. My question is, looking very broadly and looking long term, how much do you believe that our focus on Russia and China is a product of the defense intelligence establishment we have built, designed to focus on those larger adversaries, versus a very conscious balance of the threats from those larger adversaries and the terrorist organizations and other dispersed threats that we see around the globe today?
While some of the more dispersed threats can do us harm, Russia and China could be our most existential threat. And so the focus is probably appropriate to spend time looking and understanding Russian and Chinese capability because they pose the gravest threat to our nation. Striking the right balance, though, so that we can cover down on the globe, really, from destabilizing influence, ungoverned spaces across the globe, becomes increasingly challenging. So I think we're postured about as good as the force that we have today. I'd like to see us understand ISIL in Syria and Libya and all those other countries, a lot greater detail. But those are probably some areas we'll take risks just because, although they can do us harm, they don't pose an existential threat to the United States.
It's very helpful. Thank you. I'd like to shift for a moment to Iraq in particular and to your written testimony. You note that defeats of the ISF and the collapse of multiple army divisions highlight large-scale institutional deficiencies within the ISF. I'd like your opinion on how much it's the institutional deficiencies within the ISF that are at question here, or deficiencies within the GOI, the government of Iraq, that have led to a lack of trust and fundamental corruption within the armed services of Iraq.
I think it may be a little bit of both. I think the forces are not as well trained, not as well equipped, not as well organized, not well paid, and that stems right from the senior leadership in the government of Iraq. So I think that it's a little bit of both.
There are multiple lines of effort to address the counter of the threat posed by ISIL in Iraq and Syria. The preponderance of those lines of efforts, however, fall outside the military domains. And I think it is very, very important that the pace of operations be such that the military lines of operation, the military lines of effort, don't get out in front of the political lines of effort that must be achieved in order to get an enduring solution here. And I think that as you think about this conflict and what is it going to take to really resolve it, you'll find that the finishing solutions exist outside the military tool bag, if you will, and that the management of this campaign and the pace of this campaign has got to be one where what we can achieve militarily does not get out in front of what must be achieved politically, and I'll leave it there.
Yes, sir.
Can I add also the one of the things that really concerns me going forward? If the Shia forces believe that they can control ISIL without reconciliation with the Sunnis, that could cause some additional issues in the region. So that will not drive towards reconciliation.
Time of the gentleman's expired. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Stewart, can you say, over here, can you say anything about how Russia, in this venue, is using their open sky flights over the United States? And as the principal intelligence officer for the Secretary of Defense, can you tell us if that concerns you, and what are those concerns?
The open skies construct was designed for a different era. I am very concerned about how it's applied today, and I'd love to talk about that in closed hearing.
Okay. Well, staying with Russia, do you believe, or do you have an assessment as to whether Russia is in any way making moves to come back into compliance with the INF Treaty?
There's been some Russian officials who've talked about whether the INF Treaty is still valid today. And there's some things that they're doing that are pushing the envelope. And again, I regret to say I can talk more about this in closed session, but there has been some officials who've talked about the value of the INF Treaty going forward.
Yeah, I'm one of those officials. You know, if we're the only team that's sticking to the treaty, then I don't know why we're sticking with the treaty, since they are flagrantly violating it. But I would love to visit this subject with you in private, and I understand that in this venue we can't talk about it explicitly, but I think it is important for the record for us to note that Russia is in violation of the INF Treaty and making no moves to come back into compliance. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to have this panel. For those new members, it's been very educational, so very much appreciated. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Gentlemen, this committee's been exploring acquisition reform to ensure the military has the best possible equipment for the mission at the best possible cost. General Stewart, you mentioned that the conflict is more diffused. It is a very different conflict now. What are your thoughts about how we best approach reform while ensuring the best capabilities to respond to these threats moving forward?
I'm probably going to have to come back and follow up on this. I've asked the folks to look at ways that the intelligence community can be more interactive with the acquisition community. So as the environment changes, how do we shape acquisition decisions throughout the entire process of the acquisition cycle? And to be able to do that in a much more timely manner than we currently do today. So I've got some folks looking at that, and if you'd allow me, I'll come back and talk about how we might do this a little bit more efficiently than we do today. Because I don't think the system currently provides sufficient intelligence to shape the acquisition decisions, and then during the process to adjust acquisition decisions as the environment changes. So we're going to take a good hard look at that. So if you'll allow me, I'll come back and talk about that separate session.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. General Stewart, I appreciate that, because we'll be very interested to get your input on what we can do together to improve the agility of the intelligence community, especially in the kind of world that we're living in. So I appreciate very much what you've asked your folks to do. Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here, and thank your families for supporting your efforts. And based on General Mayfield's right sleeve, I suspect those efforts have been quite considerable to support you in your careers. I appreciate that. General Stewart, getting back to Russia, I'm concerned about Putin and his intentions. Obviously, everyone is. Can you talk to us about the impact that these lower oil prices are having on his ability to maintain his position, the elites in the country, as to what their perspectives are on keeping him in place, and are there any particular threats to him? And then do you see him accelerating his mischief in Eastern Europe, to help his countrymen rally to the flag while he tries to do the guns and butter thing?
Congressman, Russian military modernization remains a strategic priority of the Russian government. In spite of oil prices, in spite of the ruble value, in spite of the sanctions, that remains a strategic priority. And I don't see any time in the near term that the effects of the sanctions or effect of the economy will change their desire to build strong strategic forces that will counter our efforts across the globe.
I guess, Mr. General Stewart, what I'm asking is, can you get inside Putin's head? Can he maintain control in spite of those efforts? He told his countrymen within the last 10 days, Russians will eat less. Can you see, can we do that kind of collection that allows us to try to foretell how he's going to help create the boogeyman that'll either be NATO or us to keep his folks focused on Putin protecting them from the rest of the world?
I think he's already done that. I think he's made the West and NATO the boogeyman. And I think Russians will suffer, the Russian people will suffer far more than the Russian elites will. But it's probably something that Putin is comfortable with.
Okay.
And if you'd like to talk about Ukraine, I think you asked about Ukraine also?
About
or
what?
Eastern Europe? I'll stop there.
Well, yeah, the Ukraine is a good example of, Mr. Wilson mentioned 1939, that, Stalin used the same technique. Let's switch gears a little bit. Taliban 5, can you talk to us about the DIA's role in the reversal of the White House position? They should be detained to sending them to Qatar, and where is DIA consulted about what that continued detention in Qatar might look like?
DIA participates on the periphery to observe detainees who are transferred with conditions. We know that across over the last 4 or 5 years, about 18% of detainees have gone back into business, confirmed to have gone back into business. About 11% are suspected of having gone back into business. So if those numbers translate, of the 5 that were transferred, probably 1 in 5 could be expected to go back into the business.
Yeah. Well, given that they're, I guess they're going to be set free sometime May, June time frame, and I guess we'll go back to Afghanistan if they can convince their families to go back to living in mud huts versus the palaces they're living in now. What would DIA's role be in protecting the 10,000 or so U.S. troops we'll have from these 5, either 1, 2, 3, or all 5 of them, working to hurt Americans?
So we continue to provide tactical intelligence support. We continue to look at monitoring the number of sources that would tell us when these individuals have gone back into business. Directly, though, besides notifying folks that these terrorists have gone back into business, there's very little at this point that DIA could do besides warning of their continued operations.
I know you weren't head of DIA at the time, but was DIA consulted on the potential to transfer these 5 in exchange for Sergeant Bergdahl?
I'd have to get back to you. I do not know the answer to that one.
Okay.
Let me take that one back, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back.
Thank you. Mr. Garamendi.
Like you, I can't wait to get to the classified section. We had a discussion here a moment ago about sequestration. The President's budget blows through sequestration. The question will be ours whether we accept that both on the discretionary as well as on the military side. So the real question is not to the military, it's to us as to whether we're willing to accept a level higher than the Budget Control Act. A question, I think this will probably have to be in classified. The DIA, the CIA, the NSA, coordination, cooperation, and the rest. If you'd like to comment now, or maybe we'll just save it till later. That'll be my question in classified.
The level of cooperation between the agencies?
Yes.
Sir, I've been doing this for about 30 years now. I've never seen better cooperation. And on the battlefield, the cooperation is excellent. And even here in Washington, which is where the competition really usually begins, the cooperation and the support for each other is unprecedented in my opinion. And I've been watching this closely for the last 12 years. I've been in the D.C. area. Very, very good relationship among us all.
I'll let it go at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Mayville, during the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars in 2008, the Army had 48 active duty brigade combat teams. By the end of the year, we will have 32 BCTs based on the ongoing Army 2020 process. And if the Army fully executes additional reductions over the next few years, we may end up with between 24 to 26 BCTs. I'm concerned that the Army in strength we're building today and for tomorrow will not be able to meet the various threats we are discussing today. So my question is, if the active duty Army was stressed to fulfill its missions in Iraq and Afghanistan with 48 BCTs, could we fulfill any combat mission in Iraq and Afghanistan today, let alone against some of the other worldwide threats we're discussing today? And what will be the capability with an Army of only 24 BCTs?
Well, I would add to the scenario that you just laid out, sir. I would also say that, one of the things that we've seen less of is less forward stationing of the forces. And I think with a reduced number, the challenge we'll face is how much of the force do you want forward shaping and preventing, and how much of the force do you want maintaining high levels of readiness to respond to contingencies. The challenge will be the balance and a sense of operational priorities. With regards to the situation that the counter ISIL mission that we have in Iraq and Syria today, that's a fundamentally different mission statement than the one that we had in the last 10 years under OIF. And to that end, I think our strategy is sound. I think it is properly regionally focused. It's Iraq-first framework to get the Iraqi forces get their feet underneath them through building partnership capacity, and train, advise, and assist is the right way. The use of the air campaign has frozen the threat, most immediate threat posed by ISIL forces. And I think that, as I said earlier, if I was to focus on one area of this campaign, it would be in the non-military lines of effort. and the things that we need to do to get the diplomatic and the political outreach. Quite frankly, we need to see in Iraq political outreach that addresses the fact that some 20 million Sunni are disenfranchised with their government.
Well, I guess let me approach it from another direction. Certainly now that we have ISIS or ISIL, something we didn't have before, they have become a threat around the world and could be a huge threat. We could see another severe attack on the U.S. We may have to go back again, redo the work against a major force. Do we have, with what we're going to end strength with, 24 to 26 BCTs, do we have what it takes to deal with that, perhaps to destroy ISIL, as the President has suggested, indicated he would like to do, and to be able to deal with other threats around the world unrelated to ISIL?
To defeat ISIL, we are going to need the partners, and we're going to need a partner in the government of Iraq, and we're going to need partners in the region, and we're going to need the help of the coalition. This is not one that we would want to put squarely on the back of the United States military. To that end, I think that the way we have resourced the fight, the phasing of our campaign plans is adequate. And again, I point back to pace. I think that we can do a lot on the military lines of effort, but it cannot outpace what must be done politically.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Stewart, you spoke briefly about your efforts, particularly in the Middle East, dealing with this Islamic extremist threat that we're seeing growing there. And I wondered if you could speak to how critical your assessments are and the intelligence that you're gathering regarding the intent behind this extremist ideology informing the strategy to defeat this enemy. And what is that motivation? What is that intent?
I think ISIL in this particular case is a radical ideology that must be countered with a moderate ideology. I think they intend, if I were to try to ascribe intent, their intent is to destabilize large countries in the region, force Western countries to depart the region, and then, of course, as they've already stated, to create this Islamic State. It is based on a violent extremist interpretation of Islam, and it is not, I would argue, common throughout the entire region. So if I were to map out what ISIL would love to do, ISIL would love to have the United States and Western countries out of the region and slowly pick apart those other moderate nations who would counter their radical ideology. And if they could do that, then they could have a fairly easy opportunity to create this state that they think is appropriate for the region.
And what are the common elements that you find while much of the action has been occurring in Iraq and Syria? You listed a number of other countries in the Middle East. When we see what's happening in Libya, for example, what are the common elements that you see between these different actors, whether it be ISIL, Al-Qaeda, AQAP, Boko Haram, and the list goes on?
Ungoverned states, weak government institution, economic instability, poverty.
What are you're referring to the common elements between the different geographic locations?
That's correct.
Common elements between these groups specifically?
The common element really is just a radical approach ideology. I think that's the common element. ISIL can create, in quotes, regions just by declaring that ISIL is in Libya. It doesn't have to be anything substantive. It just has to create the impression that it is there and it is a different force to offer to the people in that region. So I don't know that there's anything more common than just the very extreme approach, very violent, very strict interpretation of the religion, and finding opportunities in ungoverned spaces.
I think it's important that we recognize this because, as you're well aware, there's a debate right now about whether, about how this ideology, how this motivation must be identified in order to define our enemy and in order to defeat this threat. And I think it's important as we look at dedication of resources and strategy and planning, that this identification of their motivation, of this radical Islamic ideology, is made very distinctly, as we would with any other type of enemy. I know for the members here who've served in the military at one point or another, when we look at a basic thing like the 5-paragraph operations order, when we look at the situation, we look at and examine our enemy. We look at what their capabilities are and what their motivations are. And so as we look at this threat that exists both in the Middle East and in countries in the West, that we recognize this and identify it clearly. Thank you. I yield back.
If I can just say amen to what the gentlelady just said. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a hearing next week on this very topic, and I think it's very, very important. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I appreciate you being here in your service to the country. And Mr. Chandler, I know you said that we cannot ignore history. I would certainly hope that we could learn from it as a country. And the Sunnis and the Shias have been in conflict, shall we say, since the 7th century. I find it hard to believe that a Judeo-Christian nation can step in and referee that conflict, and that fight won't just continue once the referee leaves. And I think that that's one of the things that we continue to see. I want to speak with you briefly, though, about the U.S. involvement and the things that we do that perhaps create the vacuum that allow organizations like ISIL to expand. And if I could read from what you presented, in Libya, political instability and ongoing militia violence have worsened over the year, exacerbating conditions that have already made Libya an attractive terrorist safe haven. ISIL has increased its presence and influence in Libya, particularly in Darna, where it has begun establishing Islamic institutions. Without a unified government and capable military, there is limited possibility of stability in the near term. People at the DOD and the White House made a decision to take Gaddafi out. And part of that decision included not putting U.S. troops on the ground to secure the weapons of Gaddafi. And now that we have removed him, we acknowledge that the situation is worse. Yet we tried to do the same thing with Assad. The administration did. And in undermining Assad, it created a vacuum that, in my opinion, certainly allowed ISIL to grow in strength. And while at the same time we're engaged in these activities that are close to or even neighboring Russia and China, we have Central and South America that we have basically lost focus on, if you will. And I would like you to speak to the issue of Russia and China and the inroads that they're making in our backyard with Latin America and South America, while we are focusing on these parts that are so far away from us and their potential threats to the United States.
Congressman, even before ISIL, Russia considered the Western Hemisphere a place that they could stage get basing rights and seek partners, if for nothing else, to carry votes in the United Nations. China also has done the same thing. So both for resources and for partnership and for influence, we see China and Russia expanding their reach, establishing cultural centers, establishing military bases to a lesser extent now than they have, certainly Russia has in the past. It is for influence, it is for resources, it is for opportunities in the region. So that is not new as a result of ISIL, but it is ongoing.
Would you agree that we have paid more attention to those parts of the world that are in China and Russia's backyard than we have to those parts that are in our backyard?
I don't know that I would agree with that entirely.
Well, I certainly respect your opinion. I would like to bring to the attention of the committee and other people one last statement in your presentation. Speaking of Iran, the regime faces no insurmountable technical barriers to producing a nuclear weapon, making Iran's political will the central issue. And I think that is one of the reasons that we in the House have certainly tried to at least give the President the authority to bring more sanctions against Iran should they choose to go that path. If I could, one last question. It's been reported that Iran has recently signed some type of agreement with Russia. Could you speak to that briefly?
I saw recently that the Iranians and the Russians were having some conversations. I have not seen anything that suggests that they've signed a recent agreement.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Veazey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wanted to ask the panel about spread terrorism on the continent of Africa. As was pointed out a little bit earlier, obviously in northern Africa, in places like Libya, where we've seen problems that are very well documented, and we know that that there's starting to be some issues in other parts of Africa. And I wanted to ask you, what's your assessment of preventing the continent of Africa from going into the same level of disarray as so much of the Middle East seems to be in right now?
Congressman, that's a really tough question because so many of the conditions that we talked about that allows extremist ideology to grow exist on the continent. Ungoverned spaces, weak central government, weak security forces, extreme poverty. Those create opportunities that are exploited by these extreme ideology. So there are a number of places across the continent. However, having said that, the African Union is starting to push back, and you're starting to see call for forces from moderate states on the continent to fight against those extreme ideology. But the force alone, the military effort alone, will not stop this movement. It must be replaced by a moderate ideology with all of the other things that will keep that ideology from growing. Good governance, good security forces, good rule of law, all those things that must be developed. Those are not military solutions, but they're critical to success if you're going to counter terrorism.
How much does it trouble you that take for instance a large country like Nigeria that has resources, they have oil money, they do spend a lot of money on military resources, but yet they've been unable to, to quell or extinguish a force like Boko Haram. And you look right next door to Nigeria at a country like Chad that's smaller in population, smaller in resources, but yet they were able to push out Boko Haram out of their country in an area that they had recently taken over. What's your assessment of you talk about disorganized governments or governments where there's no stability, but a large government like Nigeria, is that troubling to you?
It is troubling in that the lack of leadership, the lack of commitment to developing the military, the lack of equipping those forces cause Nigeria some challenges, especially in the northeast, to counter Boko Haram. If there's any good news, the oil wealth is to the south, and they would have to fight a long way in order to get to that. I'm not sure that's their objective. So capitalizing on the oil resources is a long way off. The other good news is that Chad and Cameroon and Niger and other countries around the region are starting to take on Boko Haram. So it is a violent, brutal movement, but it is, at this point, isolated to the northeast portion of Nigeria, and we're starting to get some help from neighboring countries to counter that threat.
Do you think that there's more potential to work with Nigeria to be able to extinguish Boko Haram, or do you think that the government there is not stable enough yet, or not honest enough yet to where we can be able to really work with them to be able to get this situation more under control? As you know, there are many members in Congress that are still, concerned about obviously the kidnapping of those girls and the government's I'm not going to say unwillingness, but their inability to be able to have the intelligence and the military power to do something about that.
I think there are elections that will go on the 14th of February, and I think the results of the election will give us a better sense of who we have to work with and what we can do to help. So stay tuned for 14 February for the elections and what else we might be able to do with the new government. We're concerned about the violence that might come with that election, quite frankly, and that will also shape what we can do in that country going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank both generals for being here today and Mr. Chandler for your service to this country. And I know this is not of your creation, Sequester, it's our creation. And I'm obviously very concerned, as Mr. Thornberry is, in regards to how we move forward, because we know that the end strength of all the services, but in particular the Army, at the end of this is going to put us in a very precarious situation. We also know that when we had, 500,000-man Army, we were stretched to the limit to try to fight in 2 different theaters, where we wind up stretching the Army to 15-month deployments and, stop loss in regards to letting guys retire out that needed to retire. And so I worry about how we're going to go forward. Like I said, sequestration's not your making, it's ours, and it's our responsibility, I think, to overturn sequestration as it relates to the military in particular. But, Lieutenant General Stewart, based upon where we are today with the dollars that we have, I mean, how, and maybe we can do this in a closed setting, how stretched are you to actually do all the things that we talked about? And we've covered a litany of things from Africa to Asia, to Russia. How do we do that with the confines?
Are you talking from an intelligence standpoint or from forces standpoint?
No, from an intelligence standpoint.
Yes, sir, we're pretty stretched. Can we talk about that in closed session?
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
And I have other questions for closed session. With that, I yield back my time.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to build on the Chairman's comments about the challenges that we've had in predicting the threats that we will face and the kinds of wars that we will fight, and add to that we also seem to be challenged in predicting the consequences of our military interventions, whether they are in Iraq, Libya, more recently. And I wanted to ask you, General Stewart and General Mayville and Mr. Chandler, how those challenges in the past inform how we approach military interventions going forward and the potential threats that those interventions will generate.
I was trying to rack my brain for the quote about how difficult prediction is, but I couldn't come up with it. But it's hard work, and the environment continues to change, even as you make forecasts about what you think will happen. So it is a very dynamic environment that, especially now, has so many variables and so many second and third order effects. The challenge, I think, and we talked about this with my team recently, we are all very interested in the current fight. And so there's an incredible demand from us to talk about what's going on in Syria, and all those things are important, but it peels away capability to look to the future. And so how we think about how we divide up the challenges from the current fight and allow organizations like DIA to really look deep, to think about what the world looks like 4 or 5 years from now, is one of the great challenges that I think I will face as the director, because the insatiable demand for current intelligence robs us of the ability to look a little bit deeper and think about the second and third order effects of our current actions. So we're going to try to do this a little bit better going forward. I can't promise you that we'll get it all right, but hopefully we won't get it all wrong going forward.
General Mayville, let me ask an additional question before you respond. Mr. Scott mentioned some of the vacuums our interventions unintentionally create. Some of the problems that we're fighting today, you can correlate to previous actions, military and otherwise, and decisions that we've made. How are you approaching those second and third order consequences in arming moderate opposition forces in Syria, potentially sending weapons and aid to Ukraine?
The training and equipping of moderate Syrian opposition groups fits within a broader counter-ISIL strategy. And in that strategy, it's Iraq first, finding a partner, by that a political partner, not just Iraqi security forces, but a political partner that we can work with. While we do that, we want to take initial steps to allow Syrian opposition groups to defend themselves against ISIL, and we're just on the beginnings of that. There'll be some bumps in the road. I think there'll be some challenges as we move forward. I think the initial pace will be very deliberate. Maybe even the first numbers not particularly high, but I think there'll be a certain amount of momentum. And I think as that evolves, we go back and look at where we are with the work we're doing to get the government of Iraq and its military back up on its feet to look at the next phase. And I think you'll find that the thinking on that is how do these two lines of operation complement each other. With regards to the Ukraine, I think first we've got to recognize that what Russia is doing in the Ukraine, first and foremost, represents a challenge to NATO, and we're members of NATO. And we want to look at how we can support NATO. We want to look at responding to this within the context of NATO. What is most important for us is that we maintain our ability to meet our Article 5 responsibilities. We will not allow that to be held at risk, and we need to look at what we can do to stiffen the confidence in us as a partner, as well as to assure our allies. Specifically to the what we can do in Ukraine, I think we need to look at a wider menu of options and explore that.
Mr. Chair, I'm out of time, but what I'm really interested in knowing for the future is what potential threats are we generating by interventions in these two areas, Syria and Ukraine? But I'll come back to you and maybe for the record get your response. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bridenstine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to address the threat from Russia specifically. When you think about the aggressive actions they've taken going back to 2008 with the invasion and occupation of South Ossetia and Abkhazia inside Georgia, cutting off of energy going back to the 1990s, cutting off energy to the Baltic states and people suffering, in fact, people dying because they don't have heat in the wintertime, cutting off energy to the Ukraine, threatening nuclear war in Poland because of a missile defense shield that was had no offensive capability but purely defensive, and of course the invasion and occupation of Crimea. And now we hear that the Russians are claiming that international law allows them to put nuclear weapons. We know they are in violation of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty that has been established by this administration, and now they are claiming that they have the authority to put nuclear weapons in Crimea. General Stewart, do you believe they have international law on their side when they put nuclear weapons in Crimea?
No, Congressman, I do not.
And as far as the reaction from the United States when this occurs, if it hasn't already, and I'd love to discuss this more in closed session, what is our reaction to that kind of activity?
I would defer the answer to that question to our policymakers, sir.
Okay. Well, I look forward to getting an answer to that question, because that is a question that is going to be, Mr. Chandler, I see you smiling. Would you like to answer that?
No, I just agree with General Stewart on deferring that question to the policymakers.
Okay. Well, good. What I would like to say also, General Stewart, and I'd like to commend you on the great testimony that you provided to members of Congress. In particular, one line I think is important for every member of this body to understand, which is you write that rapidly evolving commercial space technology will support the global pursuit of enhanced space and counter-space capabilities that may narrow the technological gap with the United States. So when you think about Russia, they have launched into space devices that have not been registered with any international body. They're doing, very sophisticated orbital maneuvers, potentially targeting, if you will, or at least moving in the direction of some of the space assets that would be important to the United States. The ability of our adversaries to take advantage of commercial capabilities, I think, is a concern for all of us. And I would also like to stress the fact that those commercial capabilities are available to us as well, to the extent we take advantage of them. Would you like to expound on your statement about the commercial capabilities?
I would offer only that both China and Russia have counter space in their doctrine and will use all of the available means to support a counter space strategy. Beyond that, we'll probably got to talk classified sessions, sir.
Yes, and certainly I agree with that. And when we think about counter space for people on this committee, as a Navy pilot, I relied heavily on space. And ground warriors also rely heavily on space. When we lose space, we lose the ability to fight on land, on sea, and in the air. The enemies of our country have stated this publicly. That's why they're so aggressive in this area. And certainly, you go back to 2007, the Chinese have launched anti-satellite missiles that have, targeted their own satellites, but created, tens of thousands of pieces of debris that ultimately put it at risk not only military assets, but also put at risk commercial assets. So if space is truly a place for commercial activity, we need to be clear about what proper behavior is as it relates to the international community, and not be rewarding that kind of behavior, especially when it comes to, now we're going to be partnering with China in providing information to them so that their space assets don't hit the space debris that they themselves created. In essence, we could be potentially encouraging more bad behavior, and I think this is an area that we need to be very cognizant of going forward. So my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony this morning. This question is for General Mayville and General Stewart. In your opening statement, General Stewart, you state, I quote, "A confluence of global political, military, social, and technological developments have created security challenges more diverse and complex than those we have experienced in our lifetimes." Much of today's testimony focuses upon what we do know. My question is related to what we don't know but should. What do you think are the biggest gaps in our understanding of threats to our national security?
Let me think about that one. I'm hesitating just a little bit for a couple different reasons. One, we've covered a pretty wide front when we talk about the threat. So we talked about existential threat with China and Russia, all the way through terrorism and counter narco-terrorist capability in our statement. So the biggest gap is really just understanding them all enough with enough exquisite detail to shape policy early enough. So we think we've got the scope of the threat about right. How we can do this in a more nuanced, more exquisite way and deliver it early enough for decision makers is probably the gap. and do it, as I mentioned earlier, in an environment where it's so dynamic, where events are changing constantly, where social media is shaping our policy because we can now transmit at a moment's notice around the globe on a whole host of social media devices. So it makes the decision space that we used to be able to give policymakers much shorter. And so the challenge is finding the key, that needle in the haystack, and doing it early enough and getting out ahead of the social media today, the information space. So I think that's probably where I'd say the gap is. Defining the range of threats, I think, is we're pretty close.
Great, thank you. General Mayville?
So what's going on in the world? Well, we're seeing the emergence of not just violent extreme organizations, but violent extreme organizations within a much broader trans-regional framework. We're seeing global economic shifts. We're seeing shifts in regional power balances. We're seeing rising powers, the return of some geopolitical rivalries. There are clearly some new relationships that we need to develop, and the management of current client states is challenging. I'm concerned that there are conflicts that on the surface don't appear to affect us and that we somehow can ignore them. But if you ask me, and that's not true, I think we have to, there are some things that only we can do, and we are a global leader. But if you ask me what is it that I'm most concerned about, I'm concerned about our services and our forces' ability, our military force, our joint force, their ability to have the wherewithal, the flexibility to manage the training, the readiness, and the modernization. And it is perhaps, it's important to remember it's an all-volunteer force. And the stress and demands that we are placing on this force, we should not take for granted. The soldiers, the sailors, the airmen, Marines, and their families. I think we're asking a lot of them, and it's very, very important that as we think about the future, a future that we will continue to not get right. We need to make sure that we have given to the department the flexibility it needs to manage the three major balls that we need to manage, the current contingencies, the training, the readiness, the force modernization, and being able to take care of people. And I think that we will continue to have the force we need, and I think our nation will continue to be secure, and your military will be able to meet its security requirements.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Ms. McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony today. I really appreciate it. I agree, served 26 years in the military, that we live in a more complex and dangerous world than I've seen in my lifetime. So I think we are in agreement, and thanks for the breadth of the testimony. And, as I was in the military, we would see that often the intel and the forces would be focused, usually CENTCOM, PACOM, EUCOM, but I live on the border, and you have some mentions of transnational criminal organizations, the cartels, and the porous borders. And then there's the opportunity, of course, for additional non-state actors to try and use that vulnerability as an access point for us. And again, usually the preponderance of your assets are not focused in that area, but geographically it's the closest to us for a potential threat to the homeland. So I was wondering if you could just comment on your assessment of the threat coming from Latin America and up through the South, and what percentage, and maybe this answer is in the closed session, of your assets, your intel assets, are focused on the threats that might be emanating both from the TCOs and potential other non-state actors to take advantage of those vulnerabilities?
Certainly the number of capability we'd probably have to talk about in closed session. But drug traffickers is still a great focus, especially for the folks down at Southern Command and the folks in Texas. And so we provide support to those efforts. I think they would love to have more capability diverted to that effort. It is, though dangerous to our society, the drugs that are coming in through those narco traffickers. I think it is viewed as somewhat of a lesser threat. I don't know that I agree with that ultimately.
Or do I, just for the record?
And so we tend not to devote as much resources there. Violence is down in the region. We're concerned a little bit about elections coming up in Venezuela and what that might mean in terms of violence and humanitarian efforts. Colombia has absolutely turned around over the last several years. Plan Colombia has been very effective, so there's less of that threat from the region. We don't see the same level of insurgency that we did just 10 years ago. So the real threat from Latin and Central America is the drug trafficking, narco traffickers, and we are invested a little bit, but probably not nearly as much as we should.
Great, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And again, for those who do live on the southern border and the violence, the potential for violence with the cartels trafficking literally onto their land and through their property, that is a very real threat for us. But again, the potentiality that someone else would take advantage of that for a larger national security threat is something we're concerned about in southern Arizona. I want to transition to, I was a part of the team standing up U.S. Africa Command and running our counterterrorism operations, and we were very limited on resources all the way around. And so in addition to the resource limitations, we were limited in the process for how, when we would find a bad guy, how we would be able to quickly go sensor to shooter, find, fix, finish. And again, this may be more for the closed door session, but I do want to have a deeper conversation about, with the ungoverned spaces and the rise of terrorist organizations on that continent that pose a threat to us. Again, I saw opportunities we had to take out some of these guys, but we were either limited by resources or by the process, which was too slow and painful, and we would miss opportunities, way too centralized. And we allowed a number of bad guys to continue to go about their business and train additional terrorists as we watch that happen. So I'm deeply concerned about that, and I don't know if you can comment on it, General Mayville, if any of that's changed, and I look forward to talking more in the closed session.
Much of your question, I think, is better discussed at the policy level, and so I'll defer to policymakers to take that question.
Okay, great. But resources-wise, intel-wise, we were very limited there, too.
I can speak quickly to that. It continues to be a challenge. You mentioned two networks in your questions, one that goes east-west from Kabul to Mali, and one that goes north-south in the Western Hemisphere. The demands for resources, the demands for enablers are in those areas, these non-state activities, is quite high, and managing them is a challenge.
Great, thank you. My time has expired.
Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I sincerely want to thank all three of you for your service to our country. We really owe a debt of gratitude to those that keep us safe day and night, and I want to express that on behalf of my constituents. General Stewart, you mentioned three threats in your opening remarks, and I heard them this way. Capable military competitors, we're not the only game in town, is how I heard that. An increase in ungoverned states, and you talked about ISIS. It's the third that sort of arrested my attention, and that's other actors' focus on space. And I wanted to ask you about that. You talked about anti-satellite actions, and I thought I heard you say that with low cost and relative ease, that rogue actors could interrupt our assets in space. And I think about, if I leave my cell phone home, I'm an ungoverned state. We are so dependent on technology as a nation, both in our military response, but in our day-to-day life, in our financial markets, in everything we do. And so I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit on what do you mean by low cost and relative ease? How vulnerable are those assets to the degree you can talk about it? And then what do we do about that? What are we doing? What could we do to make those assets more secure?
So I clearly wasn't as clear as I'd hoped to be. The low cost and ease of capability is in reference to things in cyberspace, not in terms of our space assets. So in terms of cyberspace, it's relatively easy to buy the tools and find the information on the network to conduct low-level cyberspace operations, whether that's destroying or degrading or in some cases denying services. So in terms of cyberspace activity, the cost of entry is low. In terms of counterspace, that's pretty high tech and a pretty high barrier to entry there.
Okay. Well, thank you. Cyberspace is a whole different subject, disturbing as well, but I think you've touched on that. My second question is for any of you or all of you, and it's in regard to sequestration. I find it difficult to get my mind around how much is enough, how much spending is enough, to what degree does sequestration interrupt your operations. And I'd like to hear some examples from you of where sequestration has squeezed your operational or intelligence gathering operations and compromised our readiness.
I can tell you that we've taken cuts in modernizing our information services, which, as we talked about, the cyberspace threat, we're taking some hits there. We've not invested. In fact, we've taken a significant cut in intelligence support to cyberspace operations, and that happened in 2013, if I remember the numbers correctly. And I think we are right on the margins, doing about as much as we can in support of counterterrorism operations as a result of the cuts. So those are three areas that come immediately to mind where we are really cutting into muscle at this point.
So does it follow, back to my first question about vulnerability in cyberspace, as it turns out, and that's an area that we're cutting investment in intel support to that area where you're saying it's relatively easy for people to come after us?
I am uncomfortable with how much intelligence capability I have within DIA and within the DIA enterprise to support the exquisite level of intelligence you need to conduct full spectrum cyberspace operations. I'm uncomfortable with the level of capability at this point. Now, we built tremendous mission teams, and those things are in the process of being built. But in terms of how you support that with the level of intelligence I think you need to do this well, I don't think we're there at this point.
All right, thank you. My time's expired.
Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you all for being here today. We've touched on a lot of things, and it literally makes your head spin when you think of all the things that we have to deal with to keep ourselves safe and to try and make the world a better place. You know, when it comes to so many of the things taking place, I think of the battles that we have. You know, we use our diplomatic, intelligence, military, economic means to handle things. We also have to have the American people behind us. And I think of a quote from our colleague Sam Johnson, who spent 7 years as a POW in Vietnam. He talks about the taste of freedom is an experience that is lost on the protected. And so you talk about a volunteer force and those that serve and the struggles that they go through and the appreciation you have for peace and a safe environment in your home. But we need the American people to understand all that we face beyond just this room and amongst our peers in Congress as well. And it makes it difficult. But to shift just a little bit to go to another topic that ties into probably everything that we're talking about, the immediate threats to our homeland. Are you comfortable with where we are right now as a nation as far as our border security? And what can we do to make it better and make the American people feel safer when it comes to drugs, disease, terrorism, et cetera?
In terms of how we secure the border, I probably am out of my depth to talk about that, but I can talk about a little bit about the threat. There are Westerners who've gone to participate in activities in the Middle East. We think that number is upwards of 3,000. We know that some of those are Americans who have gone or have tried to go in support of operations with ISIL. And so that's concern. I think within the country, I'm very confident that the FBI and the director of FBI has got a program to account for those individuals. And beyond that, in terms of the policy and how we counter that, I'm probably going to stop there, sir.
Well, I thank you for your honesty on that. But let's also take a look at things near to us, possibly the rise of Russian involvement in Cuba. This is getting into more conventional type things, but how do you see that type of threat, and do you see something on the horizon with them engaging more in Cuba, which is very near to us?
We've seen no indications that the relationship between Russia and Cuba has changed. Cuba remains a base of operations. They provide a good bit of support, the Russians do, to the Cuban economy. We haven't seen anything that changed either in terms of growth or decrease in activity. So it's a pretty stable environment at this point.
Thank you very much. I yield back. Did you have something to add, Jim?
No, sir, I don't. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Stewart, are you familiar with the Chinese technology company Huawei, Huawei?
Yes, sir. Huawei.
Huawei, thank you. Is Huawei telecommunications equipment a potential threat to the United States security?
I believe any time that we put systems on our networks that are developed in foreign countries, we ought to make sure that we have the assurances that that equipment is clean, can be looked at all the way down to the BIOS level to ensure that there are no malicious tools. So I won't necessarily single out the Chinese company, but I would be very concerned about our supply chain with any equipment that transits countries that we have dissimilar interests.
Well, in your position with the Defense Intelligence Agency, would you recommend or oppose any of say that again?
Huawei.
Huawei. Huawei.
Yes, sir.
Wish it was spelled that way. Would you approve the procurement of Huawei technology for DIA?
I would be very hesitant without some real assurance that I could look inside of those equipment to make sure they did not have any malicious code or capability within those systems.
Are you familiar with any of their technology now being in use at the DIA?
I am not aware. I'll ask that question, but I'd be surprised because I think we're pretty good at making sure we have an approved list of vendors that we acquire equipment from. I can't imagine that that's one of the approved vendors.
Let me expand on a little bit. If you were asked by the Secretary of Defense whether any of their technological equipment should be used in the Department of Defense generally, would you have a recommendation?
I would probably want to make sure we have some pretty good assurance. I wouldn't be comfortable making that recommendation on its face.
Is there anything in particular about this Chinese company that causes you to be hesitant?
Just controlling the entire supply chain of the equipment would make me a little bit nervous.
All right, General Stewart, do you have a judgment of how much unclassified controlled technical information China has obtained from cleared defense contractors?
No, sir, not a definitive amount, but it is, in fact, an area where China continues to make attempts to steal intellectual property. I couldn't quantify the amount, but I would probably put it in a substantive amount.
How would you describe the term substantive?
I'm a Marine, sir, a lot.
A lot, okay.
I don't know that there's a real way, because in this space, you may take out a number of files, and the files may contain a large quantity of information within that one particular file. So it becomes very hard to quantify how much is being taken through intellectual property theft. So I think it's an effort that China continues to pursue, and so I would say that there is a good deal, but I couldn't give you X number of terabytes or petabytes that would make anyone here comfortable. That would be an absolute guess.
So in your position with DIA, you're familiar with a lot of technical information with our DoD efforts that China has obtained. Of course, there is also the quantity that we don't yet know about. Would that be a fair statement?
Theft of intellectual property is as old as history itself, and we're just doing it in cyberspace where you can get a lot more than you could by sending someone to steal that property. So we do know some is taken. We don't know how much, and we don't know if we have a good sense if it's all or just a portion.
And do you have a judgment as to whether or not China's theft of our defense technological information has adversely affected our defense capabilities?
I would probably want to take that into a closed session, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nothing further.
Thank you. There's just a handful of things I wanted to touch on, gentlemen, before we go into the closed briefing, just briefly, hopefully. Is the Ukrainian government outgunned by the Russian-supported rebels?
I looked at that this morning, and Russia has set up basically no-fly zone over the area, so not a whole lot of Ukrainian aircraft can operate in the area. They've got a number of battalion tactical groups that are poised on the Russian side of the border that freezes Ukrainian forces from moving. The separatists are well armed. They have lots of artillery tubes. They've got support from the Russians in terms of ISR capability. I probably get pretty close to saying outgunned.
Okay. Next week, we're going to have a hearing focusing on state actors using unconventional tactics, folks without uniforms, various forms of political warfare, subversion, and so forth. General Stewart, you struck me with one of your earlier comments saying our military intelligence was geared for formations marching across borders where we can see and so forth. How is our military intelligence geared for detecting and dealing with these unconventional threats that we are increasingly seeing, and I'm talking about in addition to insurgency sorts of and terrorism operations?
I would argue that over the last 12 or 13 years, as we've gotten into this counterinsurgency, counterterrorism fight, we're probably better in that space than we have been in the past. It is very easy, though, to default back to that easy Soviet motorized regiment coming across the Fulda Gap. That's an easy, relatively easy problem set. I worry that we don't strike the right balance between understanding that threat that is really an existential and understanding some of the smaller formations where you really need exquisite on-the-ground support and on-the-ground intelligence in order to understand. Trying to find 5 guys in an urban environment is a hard, hard problem. You don't do that very effectively from some of our very technical capabilities. And so that makes understanding them very difficult, sir.
Mr. Chairman, could I add one other area of concern that in not only in the hybrid fight, but our adversaries' use of social media. I think that increasingly we're finding our adversaries very skillfully and very effectively use social media for military activities, and I'm concerned about our ability to deal in this particular domain. So as you look at the non-state activities or the hybrid fights, I would also encourage that we consider the social media as well.
That might be a good topic for our emerging threats subcommittee to dig into a little bit further. I appreciate that. Just a few months ago, Ebola was a huge thing. The only folks who could deal with it was the U.S. military, and we sent them. Obviously, that was, everybody assumes that was naturally caused and created. On the other hand, we know terrorists have experimented with various biological sorts of agents. How are we set up to detect biological threats, whether naturally created or man-made induced in the future?
Can I take that one for the record, come back with a good answer?
Yes, sir.
I don't have a good answer for that one, sir.
I appreciate it. Ms. Chandler, I'm going to give the hard one to you. There are some folks who believe that increased domestic stability inside Russia and inside China will lead them to be more aggressive outside. They need to distract their people. They need to, focus on an enemy, et cetera. It's going to be a natural reaction. Do you think that's true? Do you think that's something we have to prepare for? Because there are clearly stresses inside of Russia and China going on right now.
I think that the internal dynamics don't necessarily have a direct correlation to what either China or Russia are going to do externally. We've seen historically proven, and China is on a path for regional expansion and assertiveness in the East China Sea and South China Sea, regardless of the internal domestic situation. Russia is, in its near abroad, takes the most important aspects to the near abroad. Regardless of that, Putin today has about an 85% approval rating today, despite the economic problems that they're facing. But when challenged there, and you have to remember that the Russians have suffered, if you go back historically, tremendous amounts, and Putin is going to push forward whatever he needs to do on his agenda. So I don't necessarily think there's a one-for-one correlation between domestic strife and what either country will do to push outward. They have their objectives, and they will go ahead and pursue those.
Okay, fair point. General Stewart, is it your assessment that it is possible to talk Iran out of voluntarily continuing their nuclear program?
Can you negotiate them out of their nuclear program? I think that's a great question, Congressman. That's a great question. I know that Iran has done everything that it could at this point to retain that capability. The decision to go down the path of nuclear weapon has not been made. So the decision, when they have the capability to do so, has not been made, suggests that you could negotiate them out of doing a nuclear capability. Because there's nothing that could stop them right now. If the Supreme Leader said go, they have all the technology, they have all the capability, they could go. So there must be something that would convince them to not take that path. So I think there's room for negotiation yet.
Or at least delay.
The delay probably adds not a whole lot for them. If they decided to go, they could go fairly quickly.
Okay. Last question I've got. You answered a previous question that roughly we think 30% of the folks who have been in Guantanamo Bay detention facility have either been confirmed or suspected of returning to the fight. But that figure is true over the life of the releases from Guantanamo, is it not? So that the folks that are left are the people who we have judged not to be less releasable, if you will. And so the chances of the people who would be released now returning to the fight could well be even greater. Do you agree with that?
I have significant concerns about the remaining detainees. And I think it's also important, I want to add for the record, that DIA was not consulted on the release of the Taliban 5. I wanted to make sure that got on the record. But the remaining detainees cause me concern, and I think we can talk about that in closed session.
Okay, I think that's good. Thank you all very much for answering questions on a whole variety of topics. We will adjourn this hearing, and then everybody has time to make a pit stop, but we'll move quickly upstairs to 2212 for a classified briefing. And with that, the hearing stands adjourned.